All right, hello and welcome to the PMC Lounge Live. We are live just like we usually are every Friday. And this in this live session, the whole idea is to delve deep into real project management stuff. We talk a lot about concepts that you need to know to prepare for your PMP exam or your PMI ACP certification and whatnot. But when it comes to real life project management, when it comes to your day to day job, these are the topics that we discuss in the PMC Lounge Live, and these are the topics that are going to help you out. Today, we will be talking about what is Agile, Waterfall, and Hybrid, and when should you deploy each of these methodologies in your respective projects, right? Agile is definitely not a methodology. We'll talk more about it where we when we reach there. But remember that these live sessions, even if you're just starting out in project management or you're climbing the ladder or you're a seasoned pro in the field of project management, I can guarantee you that the insights that you're going to gain using our live sessions, they are definitely going to level up your journey, your project management journey, and your career. So definitely check out our past live streams as well. We cover real life project management topics for sure. So brace yourself for today's session. It's gonna be a blast, no doubt about that. All right. So here's a bit brief about me. I started my career in project management in 2011, and I have a lot of certifications related to project and program management under my kitty. And obviously, I have worked with a lot of companies out there as a speaker, as a mentor, as a project management consultant. I hope you're feeling comfortable and you have something to munch on. Even if it's just a glass of water, that's also fine. You gotta keep yourself hydrated, right? So do share your thoughts in the chat if you're watching this live, or even for our replay gang, you can always drop comments, throw in some likes, and help us spread the word so that we can reap the benefits together. Now, usually our live sessions, they are divided into three sections, and you see them here: welcome, the feature content, and the last call when we wind things up. So we are just warming up right now. We are just getting into today's session. I'd like to remind you, if you're here for the first time or if you're watching this on a replay, PMC in PMC Lounge stands for Project Management Certifications. Our YouTube channel is called PMC Lounge. We are all about PMP and other project management related certifications. But like I said in the beginning, right, we are not just about the exams. We are also here to keep you in the loop with what's buzzing in the industry of project management. What are the trends? What are the reports that are coming out? And all that good stuff. Our goal at PMC Lounge has always been to simplify project management and to make sure that your path to PMP, as well as your career even after PMP in project management, is smooth. You understand things around project management in the simplest language possible. Now, thousands of our community members, they have aced the PMP exams, and they've used our resources from articles that are on pmclounge.com to the playlists. Actually, go to the homepage of this YouTube channel and you will find all the playlists, and especially the one that is about PMP preparation. It is actually a group of multiple playlists, and it essentially covers everything that you need to know to prepare for the PMP exam. So everything is neatly arranged in the playlist section. Definitely check that out, and everything is absolutely free. So definitely consider subscribing to us as well. And we are also hanging out on all the socials, as you can see, on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So do give us a follow there as well, and especially our new Telegram channel, PMC Zone. If you never want to miss any update, check us out on our Telegram as well. Cheers. All right. So before we get into the feature content, here's a quote to ponder over for today. It says, project managers function as band leaders who pull together their players, each a specialist with individual score and internal rhythm. Under the leader's direction, they all respond to the same beat. How beautiful is that quote? You, as a project manager, might not be a specialist in so many different things that your project needs to deal with. And that is why, as a project manager, you are the band leader and you need to pull together the players who are all specialists in their own fields, right? So, this is very, very important. This is what project managers do day in and day out, right? So what do you think about this quote? Can you relate with this quote? Definitely go ahead and drop a comment about it, and let's dive into the content for today's session, which is all about agile, waterfall, or hybrid. Now, how we are going to approach this is we'll talk about all three first, your agile, waterfall, and hybrid. We'll go over all of these. Then we'll talk about the examples of projects that use agile, waterfall, and hybrid. And essentially, you will get a deep dive understanding of how these three ways of delivering project, how do they work. And you, as a project manager, it is your responsibility to ensure that you select the correct way of delivering your project. Now, when we talk about methodology, as per PMI, which is the Project Management Institute, a project management methodology can be described as a framework or a set of principles. It can be processes, it can be practices, and these are going to guide the management and execution of a project. Now, you are a project leader, you are a project manager, you are the one who need to ensure that the principles, practices, processes that we talk about are all in place and are all being followed. So it is your responsibility as a project manager to decide which way of delivery will be applied on a certain project, and it is your responsibility to ensure that the practices, the processes for that selected way of delivery is being followed. All right, let's move on and let's talk about why you need to choose one, right? Can we just, wing it sort of? We'll just start our project and we'll see, we'll take some stuff from Waterfall, we'll take some stuff from Agile, we'll invent some stuff as we go along. Can't we do that? We cannot do that. And that is what this slide talks about. Why should we choose? Businesses are exploring innovative ways to reimagine project management and foster creativity. Choosing the right project management methodology is crucial for achieving optimal results. You cannot really wing it, right? So, you as project manager, you need to view methodologies as tools rather than constraints, recognizing their role in providing support. This point touches upon why hybrid is sort of winning, and why hybrid is the way to go for so many projects, so many industries out there. Although I must warn you that agile is totally applicable in several industries on several projects. Waterfall is still relevant, is still applicable. Don't hate on waterfall, right? It's still working on a lot of projects. It's still relevant in so many industries out there. But this third point, it touches upon how you, as a project manager, you need to view methodologies as tools rather than constraints. And when you view these methodologies as a tool, then you can essentially make tailoring changes as needed, right? You can tailor the processes, you can tailor, you can bring in hybrid as needed. So, selecting an appropriate methodology before the project kicks off ensures alignment with requirements and a successful end product. If you just wing it, if you don't put it in black and white, what kind of methodology we are going to follow, how we are going to deliver a certain project, then essentially what's going to happen is there will be mass confusion throughout your project. People wouldn't know what kind of process to follow, right? That is why it is important to have this in black and white, to select the appropriate methodology based on your industry, based on the kind of project that you're delivering before the project even kicks off. All right. Winging it or using a loose management style may lead to gaps, delays, and customer dissatisfaction. Due to budget issues, it can result to subpar results, right? People don't even know what they are working on, what kind of process they need to follow. So, obviously, this is going to be a disaster. So, the best thing to do is when it comes to why choose, we have to choose so that we avoid all of these. We have to choose so that there's no confusion within the project team and amongst the project stakeholders. And this is something that we need to do before the project kicks off. All right. So, for each of these, for Agile, Waterfall, and Hybrid, we will look at 10 things which are going to give you a broad overview of these three ways of project delivery, right? And beyond that, we'll also talk about some example projects and how they use this specific way of delivery, right? So let's start off with 10 things about Agile project management. The first one being iterative and incremental approach. No points for guessing here. This is essentially the signature of Agile, right? So in Agile project management, the work that the team does, it is broken down into small increments, and these increments are called iterations. Now if you're doing scrum, right, scrum is just one way of delivery within the Agile umbrella. If you're doing scrum, then these iterations are known as sprints. So obviously what's happening here in Agile is that the work is essentially being broken down into small increments, and these increments are called iterations. If you're doing scrum, then these are called sprints. Teams focus on completing specific tasks within each iteration, allowing for continuous feedback and improvement. Now, you already know Scrum. If you don't know Scrum, then I'll add a link in the description below where you can essentially read a lot, not just read a lot, but actually watch videos. So I'll drop a link to the YouTube playlist for Agile for Scrum. So if you go over that, you will get to know a lot about Scrum, and you'll realize that essentially what we are doing is we take a project and we break it down into certain iterations, right? They can be sprints if we are talking about Scrum, and then we deliver parts of these projects. We get continuous feedback and we repeat the process over and over again. All right, let's talk about the second thing that you should know about Agile project management, and that is adaptive planning. So, Agile essentially embraces changing requirements even if it's late in the development process. This is the key. This is the most critical thing when you're delivering an Agile project. Project plans are flexible and adjustments can be made based on the feedback and evolving priorities. Now, in the first point itself, when we talked about Agile being iterative and incremental, right? The approach being iterative and incremental, it essentially points to adaptive planning, because we said that you have a large project, you're going to deliver it chunk by chunk, piece by piece, and you are going to obtain customer feedback, right? Continuous feedback. So, based on that feedback, you might have to change your plans. You might have decided how many sprints you need, right? You might have decided what you want to deliver in each of these sprints. But let's say after sprint number 2 or sprint number 3, based on the kind of feedback, the customer feedback that you receive, you might change the course, right? You might decide that in sprint number 4, this was what was planned to be delivered, but I'm changing this based on the customer feedback, right? So this is something that only Agile, if you are following Agile, this is something that you can do, right? So this is where Agile wins. Collaborative and cross-functional teams. Now what this means is Agile teams, they consist of members with diverse skills who collaborate closely. So for example, you have developers, you have testers, there are business analysts, SMEs, right? They all work together throughout the project to ensure a holistic understanding and effective problem solving. This is again something that you might not find in a waterfall environment. If you're working in a waterfall environment, it is possible that a designer comes in. If let's take an example of a software project. So a designer comes in, he does his high level design, his low level design, and after those designs are approved, he or she hands over the designs to the development team, and it's up to the development team to do their development work. Once the development is done, the code is ready, the code is then handed over to the testing team so that the testing team can test. But when it comes to agile, what's happening is these people, they are collaborative, and they are collaborative throughout the project, not just when their respective design or development or testing phase ends, right? Not just there, but they are collaborative throughout the release, especially because you have smaller iterations and you need to do these iterations again and again. So these people need to be in constant contact. Now, next point is about customer feedback and the involvement of the customer. So, Agile prioritizes customer satisfaction by incorporating their feedback throughout the development process. So, if you had a piece of work and you were doing 10 sprints, right? You were doing 10 iterations to deliver a specific project, you are reaching out to the customer 10 times throughout the course of the project, and you are essentially incorporating their feedback. This is what this point, not just the topic, but point number 4, this is what it talks about. The involvement of the customer is pretty high. The feedback is something that you get over and over again. So regular reviews and even demos allow clients to provide input, ensuring the final product meets their expectations. Point number 5 is all about CICD. CICD is a buzzword. If you work in software development, especially, you would hear this word CICD a lot. It stands for continuous integration and continuous delivery. What this basically talks about is the fact that Agile encourages frequent integration of code changes and continuous delivery of small and functional increments. So we are not developing a large chunk of code at once and then integrate that code when the coding date ends, right? That is not what we are doing. We are continuously integrating code changes. We are continuously integrating features. That is what CICD talks about. This is going to minimize the risk of errors, and it also allows for quick adjustments as needed, right? Based on the real time feedback that you are going to get. All right, let's talk about point number 6, which is all about embracing change. Now, if you're delivering projects using Agile, Agile recognizes the fact that requirements evolve and changes are essentially inevitable. So rather than resisting change, Agile teams, they adapt quickly to whatever the new information that they get throughout the course of the project, throughout the course of all the sprints that they've planned, and then they adjust their plans accordingly. So changes are not frowned upon, changes are actually welcomed even late in the game. Next is all about regular retrospectives. This is also something which is a highlight of Agile, because after every sprint, you are supposed to do a retrospective. You might do a retrospective in Waterfall after the entire project is over, and that's maybe it might take 6 months, 1 year, whatever, right? So Agile teams, they conduct retrospective at the end of each iteration or each sprint if you're using Scrum, and they reflect on what went well, what could be improved, and how to implement those improvements directly in the next iteration. So this fosters a culture of continuous learning, because these iterations, if you are, let's say, delivering project using Scrum, these iterations could be just 2 weeks long or 4 weeks long. So every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, your team is doing a retrospective. They are asking amongst themselves, what went well, what can be improved. And in the next sprint itself, they want to implement these improvement ideas, right? So, and double down on whatever that went well as well. So this is obviously fostering a culture of continuous learning. Let's talk about time boxed work now. So work is obviously time boxed. Agile projects are essentially organized into small fixed time frames, or you can call them iterations or sprints, whatever, right? And there are defined set of objectives for each sprint. So it's not like you have a large 10-month long project, so you divide it into 10 sprints of 4 weeks each, thinking that we are doing agile, we are doing scrum way of delivery. That's not how it works. For each of these 4 weeks of sprint, you need to have a goal defined. That is called the sprint goal. So it's not like whatever we are able to deliver in 1 month we'll deliver, and push to the customer, take customer feedback, and move on to a next sprint. That's not how it works. For each of these sprints, you will have a sprint goal, and your team needs to achieve that sprint goal. So that is an example of time boxed work. This helps maintain focus. It also allows for regular assessment, feedback, and also timely delivery of the increments. Let's talk about number 9, that is visual management. Now, what does visual management mean? It's interesting. Agile teams often use visual tools. So you might see Kanban boards, you might see maybe display tasks, progress, you might see priorities based on your industry or your organization. They may have something local that they use, right? Internal that they use. So this promotes transparency, it enhances communication, and it also helps team members stay aligned on goals. When the entire team is able to see the progress of the project because of these visual aids, right, they all feel more involved and they all feel more aligned. Finally, let's also talk about risk management. So, Agile identifies and addresses risks proactively, to be frank. A lot of people tend to think that Agile has no risk management at all. That is wrong, right? Regular check-ins, you're doing regular check-ins amongst yourselves, you're doing check-ins with the customers, there are discussions within the team and with stakeholders. All of these are going to help anticipate potential issues and develop strategies as well. When you anticipate potential issues or potential risks, you are going to develop strategies to how you can mitigate those risks. So this line of communication amongst the team members and external stakeholders, team members and the customer, since you are collaborating frequently, you are obviously going to be talking about potential risks, and you are obviously going to be discussing how to mitigate those risks. So that is why if someone tells you that risk management is not part of Agile, well, that is not true at all. With because of the virtue of discussing and having these communication lines open, collaborating frequently, you are doing risk management at all times. All right, let's talk about 10 things about waterfall management. Number 1 is sequential phases. No points for guessing. In waterfall, all that you're talking about is sequential phases. So waterfall, it essentially follows a sequential approach where each phase must be completed before moving to the next phase. This is how a waterfall is essentially drawn most of the times, right? So this phase needs to be complete before project can start with the second phase, right? So in software development, requirements must be fully defined before design work can begin. So your system analyst, your business analyst, they might be sitting with the customer, they might be drafting the requirements, they'll have a final requirements document that's signed off by the customer. And only once we have this document, we will hand over this document to the designers who are going to come up with the high level and the low level design, right? This is a software development based project example. So steps are pretty sequential. You cannot have iterations here. You want to do whatever you want to do, you do it completely in its own phase and then move on to the next phase. A good way to remember waterfall methodology or waterfall way of project delivery is plan the work, then work the plan. You do the entire planning and then you do the work based on that plan. So obviously, you do not want a lot of changes if you are working in a waterfall environment. We'll talk about it. The next point is all about fixed requirements. So waterfall assumes that project requirements are well understood and they won't change during the development process. Any changes to requirements, they typically require going back to the beginning of the project, or there's a complex change management process which you need to essentially follow if there is any change. So requirements are fixed, right? And based on the fixed requirements which the system analyst, the business analyst, they work with the customer to come up with this set of fixed requirement, they are considered fixed. And let's say 2 months down the line, if the customer wants a change, there has to be a change management process that will be followed. Next is limited customer environment. Actually, the next one is comprehensive planning. And after that, we'll talk about limited customer involvement as well. So, comprehensive planning. We just talked about how waterfall projects they involve extensive planning upfront. I just mentioned that you plan the work and then you work the plan, right? So, project managers they create detailed project plan, and these plans are going to cover all aspects of the project. So, what are the aspects? You can talk about timelines, you can talk about resources, deliverables. Everything will be planned before you even write a single line of code. The project manager is going to give you a schedule, he's going to give you the budget, he's going to give you the milestones, he's going to give you when what will be delivered, right? And most of the times, the entire project is delivered at once towards the end. But there are certain milestones, and you can actually check with the customer around those milestones as well as needed. So that's what comprehensive planning is all about. Plan the work, work the plan, and then it comes down to limited customer involvement. So in waterfall model, the customer involvement is typically limited to the initial requirements gathering phase. Remember when I said that the system analyst, the business analyst, they sit with the customer and they finalize the requirement. They prepare the requirement specification document, right? That is typically the end of customers involvement, because after that the team starts working, the planning begins, the work begins, the testing happens, right? And towards the end is when the customer gets to see the final product. This is drastically different from what was happening in Agile had these iterations, and it had customers collaboration continuously, right? So it was continuous customer collaboration, which was happening in Agile, which is missing in Waterfall. So customers, they provide the input in beginning when it comes to Waterfall, and the final product is delivered only at the end of the project. Next point is very important. No iterations. Now, the classic definition of a project is that it is a temporary endeavor. It has a start date, it has an end date. Once the project end date is hit by the project team, right, and the project is complete, it's handed over to the customer, there's no iteration from there. What that means is if you want to change anything in your project now, you need to initiate another project. There is no phase 2 of this project. There's no version 2.0 of this project. That is going to be a unique project in its own, and it is going to be a separate project. Different team members might be working on it. The developers that worked on the previous project might not even be involved in this project, right? In the second project, that is. So unlike Agile, there are no iterative cycles or sprints in Waterfall. Each phase is completed entirely before moving on to the next phase. Remember this, we talked about this, right? So obviously it is challenging to adapt to changes or incorporate feedback during the development project. You cannot go back to the first point again from here and make some changes in the requirements document, because then you need to make changes in the design, then you need to make changes in the code. So at this stage of the project, you cannot go back. And that is why there are no iterations. End of story. Finally, not finally, actually, point number 6 is all about testing at the end. So testing is often deferred until the later stages of development. In a software project, for example, this means that testing occurs after the entire system has been designed, it has been coded, it has potentially led to the identifications of issues late in the process, because after the design was done, after the development was done, that's when you sent the code, the entire project code, to the testing team to test. And if they come up with defects, you go back to the design, you go back to the requirements, you do the development again, and then you fix those defects. So this is actually pretty difficult to manage, and that is why software projects are actually nowadays not a good example when it comes to waterfall way of delivering project, because software has totally moved on and adopted agile way of delivery. Next is longer time to delivery. Now, we have sequential nature here, right? So this requires comprehensive planning. And that is why waterfall projects, they typically have longer time frames. So the final product is delivered only after all the phases are complete, all sign-offs have happened, right? This can result in delays as well. So your designing team might not sign off on the system requirements document. There could be some back and forth there, because the designing team also knows that once the system analyst, the business analyst, once they go away, once they are no longer part of this project, it will be very difficult to get hold of them again and work on the requirement specification document again. So there's this a lot of pressure of having things get be having things be done right the first time, right? So getting things right the first time, that's the pressure that you are going to face if you are delivering projects using the waterfall way of delivery. The next point is less flexibility, and this is something that you might have observed throughout our discussion on waterfall, right? So it is obviously less adaptable to changes in project scope, in requirements. Any alterations to the initial plan which was created, it may require significant effort and even resources to implement. So this leads to delays, this leads to increased costs. So if you compare this to agile, where you had these 10 iterations and you were going to the customer 10 times, you're just going to the customer once here, and perhaps you might involve customer even more if you're feeling fancy. But the point is that any changes that occur are going to go through a ton of processes, a ton of steps, and ton of paperwork. And that is why overall waterfall model is less flexible. Next is documentation emphasis. Now, there are so many different teams that are doing handovers here that it makes sense to have document everything, right? Documentation is the key, because you have the system analyst, the business analyst, they hand over the system requirements document to the designers. The designers, they create the high level design, low level design, and then they hand over the design documents to the development team. The development team, they do their code, they hand over the code to the testing team. The testing team, they do their test, based on their test cases, whatever that they have documented, they provide the feedback, and then they hand over to the deployment team, right? So there are so many handoffs that are happening, and these are all just one time activity, right? Once the business analyst, system analyst hand over the requirements to the designers, they are gone, they are working on some other project now. So this one time handover activity obviously results in the emphasis of documentation. So there is a strong emphasis on documentation at each of these phases that I talked about, and detailed documentation is actually produced before moving to the next phase or the next stage. And this provides a clear record of the project's progress and whatever decisions that were made, whatever agreements that happened, right? In a way, this is great actually. I mean, for certain projects that we are going to talk about, this is very, very important, because you cannot do, let's say, a construction project in iterations where you take feedback from the customer, your project would never end. So that is why it is actually a good step to document everything and to have everyone on board before moving to the next phase of the project. Finally, let's talk about risk management. Risk management is done at the beginning because remember, waterfall is all about plan the work the plan. When you're planning the work, that's when you're planning for the risks as well. So, risks are going to be identified and they are going to be addressed during the initial planning phase itself. So you plan all the risks, everything that can go bad during the initial phase of the project. And then you also plan if something were to materialize, if any risk was to materialize, what is the action that you're going to take. All that planning is done in the beginning itself. So this can include potential challenges in resource availability, technical feasibility, any other risks or any other factors that you find, right? So however rigid the rigid structure, it may make it challenging to adopt to the unforeseen risks later, because you do remember all of this is pretty rigid, the waterfall is pretty rigid, and if there are risks which the team was not able to identify in the beginning of the project itself, it is going to get tough as we move along to the different phases of the project. All right, let's talk about hybrid project management. What are the 10 things that we should know about hybrid project management? First is pretty obvious. It is a combination of agile and waterfall. So it essentially takes elements from both agile and waterfall. It's not like blanket agile and blanket waterfall, right? It's actually elements of both. You pick and choose and you essentially try to take the best of both worlds. So hybrid project management, it is also known as, sometimes some people call it AG-fall. So AG for agile, fall for waterfall. Some people call it water scrum fall. There are several names, right? Now, this integrates agile and waterfall methodologies. For example, it may involve using agile for the development phase, but it can adopt a more traditional waterfall approach for planning and documentation. Because I just told you in the previous slide that documenting stuff is actually pretty important in certain industries and certain type of projects. So you can take this emphasis of documentation from waterfall, but when it comes to development, maybe you can involve the customer over and over again, right? You can have this iterative way of delivery. You can deliver increments and you can get feedback from the customer based on those increments and based on those iterations. So you can actually pick and choose and get best of both worlds when you do hybrid project management. Adaptive planning and with structured phases. So adaptive planning is the star of agile and structured phases is the signature of a waterfall. What would happen if you combine the two? So hybrid projects, they often allow for adaptive planning, and this incorporates elements of agile's flexibility. However, there are certain phases, let's say initial planning, or if there's any regulatory compliance that you need to follow, right? It's a no compromise thing. You have to follow a certain regulatory compliance, and that's when you bring in the structured phase, right? So that is something that can be done, and when you basically combine these two, you are going to follow a more structured and sequential approach, which is similar to waterfall, especially for regulatory compliance or the initial planning. But for certain phases like development, you can follow the adaptive way of delivery as well. Let's talk about the next point, which is all about phased development with iterative components. So there is a development phase, right? So the pre-development phase, let's talk about software project, for example. So pre-development is your design phase. So when you move from design to development, till design you were following the waterfall way of delivery. You were very rigid, you were doing documentation and whatnot. Just for this development phase, just when your team is going to develop and actually write code, you can divide this phase into so many number of sprints, let's say 4 or 5 or 6 sprints, and then you can get in touch with the customer 6 times during the development phase. So that is how you are actually incorporating best of both worlds here. So the development phase may be divided into fixed iterations and it allows for incremental progress. This is similar to Agile. However, certain project aspects like let's say the infrastructure setup or regulatory approvals that we talked about earlier, these are going to follow the linear progression. So if you need certain infrastructure to be ready to even write code or even do your development work, then for that infrastructure you can follow a waterfall approach where there is a phase to set up the infrastructure. It could be your servers, it could be your whatever hardware that you might need, right? So that is a phased approach. We cannot move to the next step unless the infrastructure is in place. But once the infrastructure is in place and the development starts, that development can be an iterative approach, right? Okay, let's talk about the next point, which is tailored approach to suit project requirements. Now, I hope by this time you've realized that when it comes to hybrid, there are no rules essentially, right? So you as a project manager need to decide what practice, what process should I pick up from waterfall, what practice, what process should I pick up from agile. So you are essentially doing a tailored approach here based on your project requirements, right? So depending on the nature of the project, hybrid approach is going to allow project managers to tailor the methodology. So here's an example. A project with well defined requirements may follow a more waterfall like structure. So you know what the customer wants. The customer has clear requirements. You can follow a waterfall approach here. What's the problem, right? You have this phased way of delivery because the customer is 100% sure what he or she wants, and you have a clear list of requirements that you need to deliver. Then what's the point of doing phased delivery and reaching out to the customer again and again when the customer does not want to do that or is not interested in that, because the customer has given you very clear and very detailed requirements already. So maybe you can follow the waterfall approach there. But if there are uncertainties, if you, let's say, have a customer who does not have clear requirements and has a very vague idea of how the project is going to look like, then obviously it makes sense to follow an agile approach and reach out to the customer again and again, so that based on the requirements that you've been getting from the customer, you can verify whatever that you're delivering is actually something that the customer is looking for. So tailored approach can suit the project requirements. Number 5, let's talk about flexibility in customer involvement. Now what does this mean? So hybrid projects, they can accommodate varying level of customer involvement because we are following hybrid. We don't have to go to the customer after every iteration if you have iterations in your hybrid project, right? So the level of customer involvement can actually vary. Now, agile elements allow for customer feedback and adjustments during development, while waterfall like elements, right, like your phases, they may involve less direct customer participation. What this means is, let's say you have the requirements document and the customer was really involved there. After that, the customer is, let's say, not interested in looking at your high level or low level design, or the customer doesn't even understand these design diagrams. So the customer is not really interested in this. Even when we talk about code, the customer cannot read the code. The customer is not interested in it, but the customer would like to see your outputs, right? So that is what it talks about, right? When we say flexibility in customer involvement, we need not involve the customer during the design phase of the project, but we can involve the customer when we can show some outputs to the customer. So this is how there is obviously flexibility in the way customer can be involved. Risk mitigation through iterative review. Now, one thing that we talked about when we were discussing agile was that risk mitigation was happening by the virtue of frequent collaboration, continuous collaboration. That is something that we can do in here in hybrid as well, so that you can do risk mitigation through iterative review. So hybrid models, they often incorporate iterative reviews at key points, allowing for risk identification and mitigation strategies. This is going to ensure that the project remains adaptable to changes and any unforeseen challenges, right? So obviously the customer is not interested in your design, so you may not involve the customer there, but from there on you might want to involve the customer iteratively after you're producing deliverables, so that if the customer sees any risks, they might point it out. If you see any risk, you might bring it to the notice of the customer. All right, let's talk. And that's how risk management, by the way, is done in hybrid model as well. Strategic use of agile and waterfall advantages. This is something that I was talking about in the beginning itself when I said that you can pick the best of both worlds when you use hybrid model. So project managers, they can strategically choose when to apply the adaptability of agile, right? And when to leverage. So this can be when we talk about adaptability of agile, this can be your iterations, right? But you can also leverage the structured planning and documentation of the waterfall approach. So this is going to allow for optimized efficiency based on the specific need of your project. Let's talk about clear documentation for critical phases. This is again where Waterfall is going to shine, because Waterfall focuses so much on documentation. And if there are any critical phases on your project, clear documentation is definitely going to help you out. So Agile, while it encourages on lightweight documentation, the hybrid model, it can emphasize more on detailed documentation during critical phases, just like Waterfall does. So this is going to ensure compliance. This is going to ensure traceability. This is also going to ensure the comprehensive understanding of project requirements between different stakeholders. So that is why documentation is going to be the key in this whole exercise, right? Next is structured testing with iterative feedback. Now, what does this mean? So let's talk about testing phases, right? Now, the testing phases may follow a structured approach, which is similar to waterfall. But iterative feedback loops are introduced to address issues promptly. Now, this is going to strike a balance between a thorough testing and a responsiveness to evolving project needs. What this means is, when you're doing testing, you need not complete the testing phase and submit a report to the development team about the defects that you found. You can do iterations. You can do, let's say, a 3 day or a 1 week iteration within the testing phase, where whatever that has been tested in 3 days or 1 week will be reported back to the development team, so the development team can act on the feedback as needed. So you don't take your 2 months to do the entire testing and submit a report at the end. What you do is you are in constant and continuous touch with the development team after a certain cadence. It could be 3 days, it could be 1 week, whatever. And based on that feedback, the development team is going to do their work, is going to fix any defect that you may have found. So this again is something that hybrid model essentially can make use of. Next is tailored project control and monitoring. So obviously there's a monitoring and control phase in your waterfall projects, even in other projects as well, right? Even in Agile, you have to monitor and control. The hybrid project management, it allows for a flexible approach to control and monitoring. Now, agile elements, they can provide real-time visibility and adaptability. Remember, we talked about how they were visual aids that agile teams use, right? So that is something which can be incorporated here for tracking and controlling the project, monitoring the project, right? But waterfall like structures can also be applied for detailed tracking during specific project phase. So you can also introduce your earned value management here, as well as make use of your burn down charts and whatnot. You can use both, make use of whatever that suits your requirements, and that is something that the hybrid project delivery can make use of. All right, let's talk about some examples now, right? Let's look at example of agile projects. Software development, something that we have been talking about throughout. Agile is definitely well suited for software development projects. The requirements here are expected to evolve. When you do rapid iterations, they are actually crucial for accommodating any changes. And you can deliver a product that meets customer expectations if you involve the customer again and again and do delivery in a phased manner. Let's talk about marketing campaigns as well. So that is something that a lot of that you are going to see that a lot of marketing based company, right, companies that operate in the marketing industry, they are also using agile. And why? Because it can be effective for marketing campaigns. It allows teams to respond quickly to the changes in the market. They can quickly adapt to the feedback, right, and they can adjust strategies based on the performance, and this is going to continuously improve their market campaigns. And that is why the marketing industry is lapping on onto agile. Finally, let's talk about product prototyping. So when you are initially working on developing a product, you can do a prototype of that product, and those are the kind of projects where agile comes into play, right? So it is suitable for projects that involve the creation of prototypes, or let's say an MVP, which is a minimum viable product. So this is going to allow for quick iterations, user feedback, and refinement of the product based on real time insights. So what happens is, if you have to deliver a project, you first create a prototype of the product of the project and you present it to the customer or the stakeholders, and based on their feedback you can then start the work in your different iteration, in your next iteration, right? So these are some of the example of agile projects. Let's talk about some examples of waterfall projects. Number one, no points for guessing here, construction, constructing your house, right? Waterfall is used in construction projects where detailed planning, fixed timelines, and sequential approach to tasks are actually critical. So if you have to build this house, if you have to construct this house, obviously you're going to create an elevation, you're going to create a plan, the entire plan, right? And that plan gets fixed, that plan gets signed off. So any changes to that initial plan, that is going to have significant implications, right? So that is why when you follow waterfall approach here, the rigid approach, right, the rigid methodology, it is much more appropriate, because you cannot change the plan of this house when the first floor is already built, right? All right, let's talk about regulatory compliance projects. So there are certain projects where you have to complete because of some regulatory compliance, some government compliance that you need to meet. And these kind of projects, they involve strict regulatory compliance. So there you will see that requirements are already well defined. So if let's say an industry body or a government body, right, they ask you to do something based on your project, right? So let's say you're doing this construction, you're constructing a building which is, let's say, the highest building in your city. The regulatory bodies are going to give you well defined requirements. Let's say the fire department is going to give you well defined requirement of what all you need to do, so that your building, the largest, the highest one in your city, is compliant with the norms, the regulations of the fire department. So when you have to deliver projects, this is a sub project of sorts within your building project, right? The construction of the building project, this is a sub project where you need to follow certain regulatory compliances. When you have to do that, you can actually follow the waterfall approach, because the requirements are well defined, so changes can be tightly controlled. And that is how this sub project can actually benefit from the waterfall approach. And this is also going to ensure thorough documentation, and it is also going to ensure standards are being adhered to. Finally, let's talk about manufacturing. So this is a factory, if you have not recognized it yet, but this is a manufacturing plant, and manufacturing processes is where waterfall is pretty suitable, especially with you have your clearly defined steps, and if there are any dependencies, so where you need to finish a certain phase, where should you call a phase as complete, and how do you move to the next, everything is actually defined, pretty rigid, all requirements are pretty clear. So this is going to provide a structured framework for managing production processes. So when it comes to manufacturing processes, right, coming up with new processes, if that's your project, then obviously following the waterfall methodology is going to be pretty helpful. Let's take some examples of hybrid projects, and this is going to be interesting. Number one, let's talk about enterprise IT implementations. So you are working at an enterprise scale and you are implementing something related to IT hardware, IT software, whatever, right? So hybrid approaches are often effective for large scale IT implementations. The planning and infrastructure setup phase may follow a waterfall like structure. So you plan, let's say what you want to do here is your company has bought a new office, right? They have purchased a new office, and now you need to set up the IT infrastructure for this new office. So how do you plan, how do you do the entire infrastructure setup, right? How many routers you would need, how many switches you would need, right? What kind of LAN and WAN connection you need, everything can be done using the waterfall approach. You need to plan everything in the beginning itself. Now after that, when you deploy, right, when you do the development and the deployment phases, they can adopt agile principles for flexibility and responsiveness. So let's say you might ask 5 or 10 people from your existing office to come to your new office and just test, right? You may have delivered the first phase of your project. You may ask them, these 5 or 10 employees, to test if the network is fine, if they are able to access intranet websites or not, right? If their access cards are working or not, right? Because all of this is part of IT infrastructure. So this is something, excuse me. So this is something that you can do when it comes to IT infrastructure projects. Now let's talk about another example, which is research and development projects. So R&D projects, they often involve uncertainty and experimentation. So a hybrid approach is going to allow for structured planning and even resource allocation, while incorporating agile elements to adopt to changing project requirements and discoveries can also be pretty helpful. Now, remember the COVID times. I don't want anyone to remember though, but if you recall, the production of vaccine, this project was pretty much a hybrid project, because all the planning, all the development, everything was done in a very waterfall like rigid approach. But when it comes to testing, they were testing on small set of people. That was like the phase 1. Then they were testing on larger set of people. That was like phase 2. So that was the iterative approach that they adopted. So research and development projects can definitely make use of the hybrid model. And finally, let's talk about product launches. And I just added a car here because I think car companies are a really good example of using hybrid approaches to launching their cars. So they can benefit from hybrid approach, of course, because for initial planning and market research and even the production setup, all of this can follow the waterfall model. So when you are doing planning, when you're doing market research, when you're doing the actual production of the car, all of that can be the waterfall model, right? Waterfall like structure. But when it comes to marketing, when it comes to customer feedback, right, those aspects can be managed by using agile, so that you can quickly respond to the customer feedback. And that is why you would see that so many car companies display their upcoming car models in certain events, in certain there are organized events of these car companies, right? There are expos, there are shows and whatnot, and that's where they display these cars. And a lot of experts, a lot of car enthusiasts are they basically visit it, and the car companies, they try to gauge the feedback, they try to gauge the sentiments of for this car based on these experts and customer feedback, right? So that is something a lot of car companies do. They do their production and everything in waterfall approach, but when it comes to marketing, when it comes to the customer feedback aspect, that is where they deploy agile. So I hope you were able to understand all these examples. There is a reason why hybrid wins here. The choice between agile, waterfall, or a hybrid, it is not mutually exclusive, right? So it's not like when you follow agile, you have to be 100% agile, or when you follow waterfall, you have to be 100% waterfall. You can do certain tweaks here and there, but if you want to open a Pandora's box, you can go with hybrid and take best of both worlds based on the needs of your project. So, based on your industry, the organizations may adopt a hybrid model by combining the elements from both agile and waterfall methodologies and create a customized approach that fits their unique circumstances. Now, one thing to remember here is that you are the project manager. So remember that you are the expert. You need to ensure that the processes are in place so that the project roadmap and the day to day activities aren't a problem. But at the same time, you need to have a plan for the future as well. You need to plan how many iterations you would require, even if you're doing a hybrid model, right? You need to basically plan for a certain phase that is going to follow agile. So how many iterations it is going to have. You need to define what would be the change management process if you are following hybrid. So as a project manager, you need to decide whether you're going for agile, waterfall, or hybrid. At the same time, you need to define the processes, and you are the person who is an expert here. This is the reason why PMP exam wants you to know agile, they want you to know hybrid, they want you to know waterfall, because if you are PMP certified, you are someone who is expected to understand all ways of project delivery and who is expected to be an expert in all of them. So I hope you got value out of this video. By the way, before I dive into this slide and talk about lounge access, I like I said, I hope you're finding value in whatever that we are discussing here, and I'm sure that you are walking away with some good nuggets. If you are, then go ahead, drop a like and let me know. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on what we have talked about today? Is there anything that you would like to add? Are there any examples that you would like to add for agile, hybrid, waterfall, whatever, right? Is there anything that you think that we should be aware of when we are following the hybrid model, right? Let me know in the comments. We can talk about this. In fact, if you want to discuss anything with me, that is where lounge access comes into the picture, right? So you can discuss your career goals, you can get your questions answered around the PMP certification, the project management career path. We can very well talk about agile, hybrid, and waterfall model. As long as we stick to project management domain, we can essentially get on a call and talk stuff out. You can contact admin@pmclounge.com to schedule a meeting. This initiative is called Lounge Access. So definitely take advantage of this opportunity. It is aptly titled Lounge Access because remember, we are PMC Lounge and this is Lounge Access. All right, here's a testimonial. Please drop your feedback. It keeps us stay motivated. It keeps us going. Head over to pmclounge.com/write and do drop your feedback. Make use of the comments, right? And that is going to help us stay motivated and create more free content for you. So that's all in this one. I hope you got value out of this video. Like, share, subscribe. If you want to contribute, make use of the thanks button or head over to pmclounge.com/contribute. Don't forget to check out our website, pmclounge.com, your number one free PMP and project management resource. Thank you.